This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
My kid was listening to something. They were talking about the Delphi update that we talked about. I guess everybody put out something about that. We sort of mixed them into our Christmas cases. So it'll appear somewhere in the Christmas cases we release. We were talking about that. And I realized something interesting that I wanted to mention to you. I don't think they'd be asking for information if they believed that Keegan kid had done it. And this is what I started to wonder. Whatever they were listening to, it's either a podcast or YouTube or something, they were asking me questions about it. And they referenced something about the dark web and selling off Instagram accounts, I guess, and like social media accounts that were used to catfish people.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious if I posed this question to the kid too, but I was curious if maybe the police, first of all, searching through the child pornography, found images that they traced back to Libby or Abby, meaning they had got caught up and sent pictures. So it could be relatively unrelated. It was just found in the process of searching for who had done that to them.
Right.
Or if they had DNA that didn't line up with it, and that's why they were putting this out there now. It seems kind of strange to ask for information the way that they did in the press release. And if people haven't heard that, it's basically a press release saying, anyone who's had contact with this Anthony Schatz account, we'd like to hear from you and know how you were contacted, on what platform and what name they might have used, and whether or not you met them, and whether or not you gave them their address, I think.
I didn't see all that. All I saw was that they were looking for people who had interacted with a picture of the known model and the username.
Yeah.
And they gave information about basically being baited out to meet them.
Yeah, I went down this rabbit hole. I don't think it's dark web related, and I don't think somebody sold that account or anything like that. I sort of wondered if there was someone related to whoever maybe the primary person is, and they have two things of DNA. Basically, I'm wondering if there was an accomplice there, and that's how they end up with maybe mismatched evidence, and that's why they're still searching. And I was wondering if it was a girl.
I doubt it very seriously. Something I looked at, I did have the impression that it might be like his stepsister or something. It seemed like she was either participating or he was using
Pretending.
her.
Yeah.
So that's a possibility. However, I feel like they've known all along it was him, and that they, for whatever reason, they just don't have enough evidence. I also feel like they need to make the evidence that they do have work. And I don't really say that lightly, but you know, I know we talked about this, but we've talked about so many cases that, you know, I do remember his house was searched 11 days after the bodies were found. And there were specific reasons why it was searched, because of some kind of connection. And that connection didn't come from nowhere. And the fact that that connection was made and the search occurred and they found stuff, I assume they found something, you know, Anthony _Schatz on Libby and Abby's, one of their phones.
Or some of their social media. I understand what you're saying.
Well, yeah, I mean, on their phone would be their social media, I assume.
You just assume there's a digital connection between that name and the victims.
Right, and I think that they tracked it down and it went to this guy. And because otherwise, it's going to be really hard for him to not be involved, given like what we find out subsequently, like that he ends up, being somebody who would potentially have some young girls come out and meet him at a park.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. I'm having trouble wrapping my head around the gap between the search at his house and then the subsequent investigation in 2020, and then the arrest later in 2020, and then the release of information in late 2021. What are they missing?
Well, we talked, because in the arrest warrants, it does reference the case. He was arrested on child exploitation, child abuse, child pornography, that kind of thing. And all of the evidence was based on the search that occurred 11 days after Libby and Abby were found. And so that evidence existed at that point in time. Okay, nobody made the arrest. Fast forward to 2020, and he's finally arrested in August. And I know in the arrest warrant it was mentioned that there's a gun in one of the pictures that they seized. And that made me think, well, maybe they suspect that gun tied to something of his has something to do with the murder. And because it was a weird thing for them to sort of like call out specifically in the affidavit for the arrest warrants.
Yeah, the probable cause.
I feel like the reason that the case got dropped, like the time passed, unfortunately, is just, it has to do with bad investigators or bad investigation skills. Because if you are just following along instructions, right, this is what you do. At this point in time, I imagine based on what they've said that they had, which was, a Comcast IP that went back to this location, which was their house. Do you remember all that?
Yes.
Okay. And so, they got so far, and basically what they had was information about a profile that used an IP address that was linked to somebody living in that house. And ultimately, they were able to use the devices to go ahead and link it to him, I think. That's how I read it. Now, there was a lot of redactions in the affidavit. But what the gist of it was that they made all these links together. And then they couldn't go further than that, because just saying, like, it makes perfect sense that he killed those girls, right?
Yeah.
It actually, that's not legal evidence, right?
No. That's sort of what they said. They're agreeing with you because. So once I heard the kid listening to the podcast, I sort of had a minute between then and now where I was, that case keeps popping up in my head. We don't really cover it. We just talk about.
I feel like we've talked about it a lot there recently.
Yeah, it comes up as when we're trying to do current news stuff. But so this week, Monday of the week we're recording, they released a new statement. And they just said that the Indiana State Police are looking into Klein as part of the investigation into the deaths of Libby and Abby, but they didn't call him a suspect or a person of interest. And this is their statement, which sort of goes with what you're saying. The Indiana State Police has received many media inquiries since our December 6th press release concerning Anthony Schatz, and that's in quotes, as the username, and eventually the identification of Keegan Klein. Your questions are certainly relevant as they relate to a long, complex, and extremely complicated murder investigation. During the last nearly 5 years, we've conducted dozens of secondary investigations based on information we received. One of those investigations included a possession of child pornography case resulting in the arrest of Keegan Klein. The information we have and continue to receive concerning Klein has ebbed and flowed over these last few years. We understand there was a period of time that passed between 2017 and 2020 when Klein was not arrested and incarcerated for the possession of child pornography. Once the Indiana State Police presented the criminal case to the Miami County prosecutors in June of 2020, immediate action was taken by both the Indiana State Police, and the Miami County Prosecutor's Office, which ultimately resulted in Klein's arrest. Like so many other pieces of this investigation, we always review, learn from, and make any necessary adjustments. We do not believe that any person has done anything intentionally wrong, but we will continue to critically evaluate our efforts. We know there is an enormous interest in the why of everything we are doing, but we cannot and will not speculate. One day you'll have the opportunity to see and know what we do, and we look forward to that day.
I feel like that there was a gigantic mistake made.
Somebody dropped the ball or did a favor or something.
I also feel like they may not even have enough evidence on what he's charged with currently.
That it's him, you mean? That they just have evidence that crime occurred, but they don't have evidence that it's him?
They have evidence on his phones and stuff that he was in possession of stuff. And I don't know, there could be a question about ages or something, because, you sort of have to, it's the state's burden to prove, any girl that's on his phone naked or whatever is underage, right?
Yeah.
And so if it's that kind of...
The victims being, let's just say they're 15 to 18, just for a second. I can't imagine the victims really want to participate in this.
Well, no kidding. But so it's concerning in a lot of ways. I hope I'm wrong. I really do. We don't cover this case. I've said repeatedly, I've felt like there was something wrong from, the very beginning of the case. Then I stepped back because we're not doing the case, and I said, well, maybe it's just because it's an ongoing investigation, right? I don't feel that way anymore. Somebody's dropped the ball. The statement that was released sort of to the media to calm everybody down, it was just, there's nothing that can be said that's going to undo the fact that it was sat on from 17 until June of 2020 when the Indiana State Police took it to the prosecutor and they immediately filed charges. We saw, well, I believe you saw it too, the arrest affidavit.
I read it. It's on one of the episodes.
Right. And there was no information that was gleaned beyond the period of time right after the murders. So the statement that what you just read, there wasn't more information that led to the arrest. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't ongoing things, but we read the arrest warrant affidavit from August of 2020.
Yeah.
And the only point of reference is that search in 2017 after Libby and Abby were killed.
Right.
And so I hate to be blunt, but that's hogwash to say that like the reason there was that gap of time is because the investigation was ongoing. If it had made a difference, it would have needed to be mentioned in the affidavit for arrest.
Yeah, basically a new investigator is assigned, and he doesn't take very long. It's like less than 90 days.
It went to a different agency, right?
I believe so. It either went to a different agency or went to a different division within.
It went to the state police. The state police took it over, and then when the investigator that's leading it, at least, he acted almost immediately, and he acted on information that was from the initial search warrant. They dropped the ball. Like I said, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't feel like I am wrong, and I knew it even from the jump, and I didn't trust my instincts because I thought certainly they are not screwing this case up. But that is exactly what it sounds like they're doing. And I hope they prove me wrong, because otherwise Keegan Klein, he should have been arrested at the point in time that they were done with the initial investigation that they started 11 days after the girls were found. He should have been arrested immediately. There was nothing else in the arrest warrant affidavit to indicate that anything new occurred.
Yeah, it looks like the verifications and stuff were really just the investigator going through the digital records.
that they
That's
already
what-
had starting
Right.
11 days after the girls were found. That being overlooked like that, I feel like what happened more than likely was they didn't have enough to connect him to the murder, and it didn't occur to anybody that they should be like trying to get him on whatever charges they could.
That's the part that like throws me off about this case, is if that is the case and you are correct, why didn't they do that? And I don't have an answer to it.
I think they just
throwing it out in speculation.
I think they just literally didn't even think about it, because the charges he is charged with are pretty serious charges.
They're incredibly serious.
I mean, they're not like 2 counts of first-degree murder, right? But they're serious charges, and it is I was going to say it's unacceptable, which it is unacceptable, but it's not just unacceptable. It is appalling.
Well, they did announce this week that the plea deal talks have broken down, and that they will be setting a trial date for that, which means that sometime in early spring, they'll set a couple of dates to try and do something with that case. My guess is there'll be a pretrial conference. Oh, I say that and dates appear. So it looks like they're stating a pretrial conference will occur on February 24th, and then there'll be another trial conference date on April 21st to start the jury trial on May 9th. Those dates may not hold. Frequently, there's delays that happen in court, but looks like we'll see something out of that particular angle sometime in early 2022, probably before summer, definitely by summer. We would see some movement there, I think, because this case has gotten a little age on it.
Yeah, I don't know. Was there anything else about whatever source you were listening to or heard about?
No, I don't even know what it was that I was listening to. It wasn't new. When I say something's heavily speculative, it was whoever was talking was like way deep in like dark web land, talking about maybe somebody had bought the account, blah blah blah. And the geography didn't work for me for what they were talking about, so I just didn't listen, and I didn't recognize the voices. It's not a podcast I listen to regularly, I don't think. And I honestly haven't listened to many true crime podcasts this year, so it might be something new.
Well, I just I've had a bad feeling about that case the whole time, and now I'm starting to think that maybe we should take a look at
it. We've got other things going
maybe
on.
I will take a look at it.
Maybe if you want to take a look and come back and like we can dig into it. There are podcasts that cover that case, and a lot of the big true crime podcasts cover it kind of, in different episodes here and there. I don't like jumping into that pile unless I have something brand new to offer, and I don't know if I do yet. I had been looking at a season 3 case for us that was also a child murder, and I think ultimately you and I, having gone through the autopsy records and everything related to it, we don't know if it's actually a murder, so there's that. And then I was tracking down another season 3 possibility where I'm digging into this police chief who is somehow still a cop after a bunch of weird things happen. And I don't know. This could be like a mini series maybe next year. I'm down for that, particularly if something happens and if this guy does go to trial. That may be the opportunity I have to develop some sources. The truth is, I don't have any sources in that area at all. Most of my source material comes from Louisiana, North Carolina, places like that.
Well, I have no interest in doing that type of case.
Talking about Libby and Abby?
I'm talking about Libby and Abby, and because I've it's just not a case I would do. But it keeps coming up, and I have this like initial gut feeling that I had like to begin with that I tried not to have, but yet it's back and it just keeps being reinforced, and I really don't like that.
Well, this sounds wrong, but this was my take, and this is why I brought it up. I was curious about the male-female accomplice theory, like screwing up the DNA, and I know you don't agree with that, but here's
I do want to point out, when I said that there wasn't a girl, I had forgotten about the whole stepsister angle.
Yeah, well, I just want to. So here's my take on that part. What I would dig into this for would be an investigation of the investigation. Does that make sense?
Well, sure.
I would want to use this trial that they're talking about here. So that's like in the future. I would want to know, like that's an angle once I have court records and I can start going through things and I can figure out what needs to be a public records request. Because there's some things in this case that are FOIA-able, and that's because there's a federal leg to this case.
So we've got to think about, regardless of why it's happened, right? And you're talking about the murder case, right?
I am talking about the agencies involved in Libby and Abby's murder, but I'm saying you can probably get a lot of information about that investigation from what comes up at the trial of Keegan Kline.
Okay. And so just keep in mind, and this is sort of where I'm coming from on it. You've got a situation where they immediately encountered this situation with the search warrant that yielded an arrest, 3 years later, and they didn't act on it immediately. And so that's what the investigation is going to be like.
The thing about that is there's multiple angles to that. There's favors and malfeasance, or misconduct, if you will, and then there's incompetence.
And I'm afraid it's leaning more towards incompetence.
Well, incompetence makes for a better, longer, more interesting investigation. Unfortunately, malfeasance is pretty short.
Right, but I don't see, in the murder of 2 teenage girls, I just don't see malfeasance being a thing.
Well, this is a thread I pulled online, and I went back to some sites I don't normally go on because they're kind of cesspool-y. Doesn't matter which sites they are, but the thread that I was looking for is I wanted to see if someone was saying, and I talked about this in the past, but such and such's relative has pull with such and such police department, and that's why this thing happened. So when I say misconduct, I mean if it's the sheriff's kid or someone related to someone who's in with the sheriff or the police chief or whatever, sometimes there can be misconduct going on in the form of incompetence. So their assumption is,
wait, what?
They believe dad or uncle or cousin or whoever of a suspect who says he was with me, and they don't really look much further because that's a trusted friend or trusted person. So it's both incompetence and malfeasance at the same time, but the incompetence part makes it more interesting, a story.
Well, and quite frankly, I actually prefer people to be like consciously and completely aware of what they're doing when they do the wrong thing. Incompetence is a whole lot harder to really get mad about. I mean, because
that's what I'm saying. Usually it's more interesting though.
Yeah, no, you're right. But this isn't the case that you'd want to be experimenting in the agency's competence on. Now, I felt like it got a lot of press, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, it did. That's the problem. This case getting that amount of press in that area means you've got a lot of people who aren't used to that spotlight.
You realize that it doesn't add up, that
it makes no sense.
They've had this, and I knew this all along, right? But I thought, I'm not doing that case. I'm just not going to care. But they've had all these stupid things that like completely contradict the fact that they basically had a pretty good person of interest 11 days after the bodies were found. So if, all the situations that they've presented, the different things, the guy killed himself, some other stuff happened, right? How do those parallel to the findings of the search warrant of the Kline house 11 days after the murder? Like, how are any of those things even coming into anything?
Look, department could be stretched too thin, resources too small. I don't know what to tell you.
Well,
all I can tell you is it doesn't look good.
I'm very disappointed that I am of the opinion that this case could have been solved almost immediately, which is what I imagine should happen in a case like this. And that's why perhaps it set off my spidey sense, and I was like, there's just something weird about that. Now it's at the point now where there's like, mainstream media TV series that have picked the show up or picked the story up and did a show about it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I've seen the moms or sisters or whoever talking about it. So that's the point we're at. And so something wasn't jiving, and I was like, this is weird. And now I realize I really hope, I really think it's probably incompetence, but I don't know. We'll see what happens. But I wouldn't hold my breath on those trial dates.
Oh, I don't know what's going to happen with the trial dates. I was just mentioning them because that's why that was the whole purpose of me bringing it up, was that statement, and then them saying that the
And
trial
just
dates
to
are coming back around.
clear, the trial dates have nothing to do with the murders.
Yeah, no, this is just a trial of the related social media person.
I imagine
We
they're
don't even know
trying
what
to
degree.
get the bigger story out of him.
Oh, I'm sure that all the plea deals have something weird attached to them that he may or may not be able to deliver.
Well, the bottom line would be, we need to know what happened here, and we'll drop everything else. That's what. But in order to have that being a looming threat, it's actually got to be in the works.
We're going to go back in time to December 1992. I actually went on pro death penalty pages for this. These pages are sort of borderline racist in some instances. Had you heard of this one before?
Yes, I've heard of this case, but it's a group of people, and we're kind of focusing on the one.
The group. Yeah, so the group is well, let's start here. In December of 1992, there is a group of young people in Ohio, including several juveniles, and they all at various times were staying at the apartment of Yuma Avenue in Dayton, Ohio, of a man named Bill McIntyre. The group includes Laura Taylor, DeMarcus Smith, Nicholas Woodson, Heather Matthews, Wendy Cottrell, Marvin Washington, Jeffrey Wright, and a guy named Marvelous Keene. On December 24th, 1992, Marvelous Keene and Laura Taylor enlisted Heather Matthews to help them rob a guy named Joseph Wilkerson, who was an acquaintance of Laura Taylor's. Taylor told Matthews that she arranged for the three of them to go to Wilkerson's house, and the pretext of why they were all getting together over at Wilkerson's house was they were going to have an orgy. They get Heather Matthews involved as part of this setup, and Keene, Taylor, and Matthews, they head over to Wilkerson's house on foot. After having a little cocktail, Wilkerson and Laura Taylor go into the bedroom, and after waiting a little while, Keene and Matthews follow them. Wilkerson takes off his clothes, and Taylor and Matthews pretended like they were going to do the same thing. Keene began to take off his own pants, but then pulled them back up and drew a gun. He ordered Wilkerson onto the bed, and then he had Taylor and Matthews tie Joseph Wilkerson to the bed. So while Keene was watching Wilkerson, Laura and Heather, they go through the house and they start piling up stuff to steal. They take a microwave, a TV, a cordless phone, a curling iron, a blow dryer, and they load it into Wilkerson's car, a Buick. And then Joseph Wilkerson tells Keene that he has a .32 caliber Derringer in the garage. This is a little gun that usually they only fire one or two shots. You know what a Derringer is?
Yeah.
Okay. So Keene goes out and finds it, and he brings it back to the bedroom, and he then shoots him in the chest with the Derringer after covering him with blankets to muffle the sound. Taylor and Matthews hear the shot, and they return to the bedroom, and they see Keene holding the gun. Wilkerson's feet were shaking, and Keene handed the Derringer over to Laura, but it would not fire again. I guess they didn't understand this gun at all. At that point, Marvelous gives Laura his own gun, and Laura shoots Wilkerson in the head, and Wilkerson stops shaking. Keene and the accomplices then leave in Wilkerson's car, and Marvelous tells the girls that are with him, Laura and Heather, that they cannot tell Marvin Washington and Wendy Cottrell, who are staying with them at Bill McIntyre's place. But later that evening, Keene, Taylor, and DeMarcus Smith went out on a walk. Marvelous and DeMarcus were carrying guns, and Keene confesses to the police that as they were walking, they saw Danita Gillett at a public telephone. For those of you who don't know what that is, on the corner, there used to be a little booth. And inside would be a telephone. And if you live in a neighborhood that's not fortunate enough to have a booth, it would just be randomly mounted on a wall or a pole. And you could just walk up, and it was like this big black box with a silver chrome dial pad on it. And you would pull the handle off the receiver, and you had to figure out a way to pay for it. You could either use change, or by this time you could use like a calling card, or you could call somebody collect and really make them your friend. So they'd have a charge on their phone bill. I keep forgetting people don't know what those are. So when they get to Danita, DeMarcus and Marvelous, they pull out their guns. DeMarcus forces Danita to take her shoes off. And then for some reason, because she took her shoes off, they decide they're going to shoot her. So they shoot Danita. And then DeMarcus takes her shoes and her jacket, and they return to the apartment, and Laura is wearing Danita's jacket that they just took off of her body, basically. DeMarcus is carrying her shoes. So later that night, DeMarcus gets into it with Heather's boyfriend, Jeffrey Wright, outside of the apartment, and he does, the best way to diffuse an argument. He shoots him. Jesus. So then Marvelous comes back to Joe Wilkerson's house, who's dead inside, and he cleans out more items from the house, and he takes his other car, which is a Pontiac. So then the next day, since it's Christmas, Laura Taylor, who was in on the first orgy for hire robbery, she goes over to see her ex-boyfriend, a guy named Richmond Maddox, and she steals some stuff from him under the pretext of she's going to have sex with him. And then she does the same thing she did to Joseph Wilkerson. She shoots him in the head. So early in the morning on the next day, Heather Matthews drives the Pontiac to a BP service station, and Marvelous and DeMarcus steal a woman named Kathy Henderson's car at gunpoint. This Christmas holiday is not turning out like they expected. Marvelous and DeMarcus drive off in Kathy Henderson's car, and Heather Matthews follows them in Wilkerson's Pontiac. Later that morning, Heather drove the Pontiac over to the Mini Mart with Marvelous, DeMarcus, and Laura in the car. So Laura goes in, and she comes back, and she tells everybody that there's only two people inside the store. So Matthews hands a revolver to DeMarcus. DeMarcus and Marvelous already have automatic pistols or semi-automatic pistols on them. And they go into the store. There's a young woman named Sarah Abraham whose family owns the store. She's working behind the cash register. And Marvelous Keene orders her at gunpoint to open it. So she opens it, and she gives them $40. And then Marvelous ends the robbery by shooting Sarah in the head. It took her a couple of days, but Sarah dies of her wound at New Year's. DeMarcus also shoots at two other people. One of them is a customer named Jonas Pettis. He wounds him, and then he shoots at Edward Thompson, who was one of the clerks in the store. Both of them survived, and they testify against the group later. So later that day, Laura and Heather decide that they're going to jump Wendy Cottrell because they thought that she was snitching on them. According to Heather, they didn't talk about shooting her, but they talked about kicking her butt. In a subsequent conversation with Marvelous, Laura, Heather, and then also one of the other people who had been wandering in and out of this apartment named Nicholas Woodson. DeMarcus says he was going to unload a clip into Marvin Washington's ass. That's another one of the ne'er-do-wells who were hanging out in this group. According to Marvelous's confession, DeMarcus thought that Wendy and Marvin were snitching about them shooting Jeff Wright, who had been staying at this place. And in case you're not following along here, he was Heather Matthews' boyfriend that DeMarcus had shot. So the group talks about picking up Marvin and Wendy and taking them to a park or something. The group then drives over to the apartment. They pick them up. They end up dropping Nicholas off at his house, and then they drive over to a nearby gravel pit. And at the gravel pit, DeMarcus orders Marvin out of the car, and then Marvelous drags Wendy out of the car. And Marvin and Wendy tell them they did not go to the police. They have not snitched to anyone. Marvelous and DeMarcus then force them at gunpoint to walk into the gravel pit. And behind a pile of gravel, Marvelous shoots Wendy and DeMarcus shoots Washington. A little later on, a grand jury indicts Marvelous on 8 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts each for Wilkerson, Washington, and Cottrell. So that's the first of the murders. But then he gets 1 each for Danita and for Sarah. So then the counts for Wilkerson, for Joe Wilkerson, they carry 6 death specifications, meaning the course of conduct, escaping detection, and 2 aggravated robbery and aggravated burglary counts or allegations. For Wendy, the death specifications were for the course of conduct, witness murder, meaning whether she snitched or not, he thought she might, so he was killing a witness, and then for kidnapping. Marvin Washington had 3 death specifications for the course of conduct, witness murder, and kidnapping. And then for Danita and for Sarah, the death specifications were course of conduct and aggravated robbery. They also included a bunch of other charges related to firearms, aggravated burglary, 6 counts of kidnapping. They just basically threw the book at him. Marvelous is a genius legally, and he decides that he doesn't want to be heard by a jury trial. He wants to go for a bench trial in front of a 3-judge panel. And of course, they found him not guilty and let him go.
I doubt that.
They find him guilty on all counts. They agree on most of the death specifications. And where they don't agree with the death specifications, they hang it on felony murder. The end result for that is they decide that he is a perfect candidate for Ohio's death penalty. Now, it takes him a while, but what do you think happens to Marvelous? Do you think he gets off on appeal and then is able to go and live a happy life somewhere, turning over a new leaf?
No, I think that he eats a disgusting last meal and is put to death without saying a word. And when I say disgusting, like, I mean disgusting in the sense of how much he ate.
Okay, so here's what I heard, and then I'll let you tell me what it is. I heard that he had a porterhouse steak with a whole bottle of sauce on it, a pound of shrimp with also a whole bottle of sauce on it, and then French fries and onion rings, dinner rolls with a stick of butter, plums, mangoes, a pound of grapes, a whole German chocolate cake, 2 1-liter bottles of Pepsi, and 2 16-ounce bottles of A&W cream soda.
That's exactly what I heard.
And that his final words were, "I don't have no words."
That's what I think happened to him, and that is what happened to him. And I feel like that was a waste of his life. It was a waste of all of his accomplices' lives. They had absolutely... Well, I guess as the killings went on, they felt like they had more motivation. But, I mean, it's almost like it was out of boredom.
I did not understand anything that these people were doing other than that they are pretty terrible people.
Yeah, it was really bad. They're walking out with a micro. I mean, the first guy they kill, they're taking like his kitchen appliances.
Like I chuckle out of anxiety on these cases. I don't know if that's what yours is.
It's so stupid. I mean, not that these people died, but like I guess now that we have like, more readily available entertainment, less people get bored like this.
This case came up for me a very long time ago. In fact, a part of this case came up when I was in college. And it was in this stack of cases that over the years I sort of added to. And I wanted to do something with it on a more interesting publication level, but it didn't like look great for where the criminal justice system was headed. So I didn't do anything, but I did at least want to talk about this case. Have you ever seen the clemency report in this case, by the way?
Yes, I have.
To give people an idea of what's going on here, the crimes that we described happened in 1992, over the Christmas holidays of 1992. The court part of this happens in 1993, and ultimately he goes into prison meaning not jail, and custody of the prisons December 15th, 1993. So it doesn't take long to convict him and to get him into the system. In 2009, it is decided that he gets a clemency petition. So a report is prepared. The way that these reports run, I think this one was maybe 10 pages, if that. They represent all of the victims that they can. It's very difficult to do that. It's not neat and clean like a mini series or like a drama series you might see about crime where the mom is there and the dad is there. It's really like they're picking and choosing who they can find that will come forward and speak out or against what's happened. And if you consider that they're trying to prepare this report basically in 2008 and 2009, that's a really long time between 1993 and 2009 to suddenly be trying to get someone life in prison. That's the only thing that can happen here. He has so many convictions, it would take forever to overturn them all.
Right. I believe that clemency, though, it's strictly because he's about to be put to death, and it's to have the sentence commuted, right?
It's really to make the governor feel better. So they do a death penalty clemency report so that everybody can feel good about themselves by murdering an individual for murdering individuals. That's the gist of this. And like, I don't take any side of that, but no matter how you say it, a human life is being taken because they took human lives.
Yeah, try to explain that to your children.
I know.
And I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just saying it's a weird concept.
Yeah. To Marvelous's credit, he did not try to appeal. He did not assist any further appeals related to his case. He went to jail, and then he went to prison. He got very few infractions. He was never placed in segregation or disciplinary control. His infractions were for having cigarettes in 2006 and for playing his radio too loud in 1994. There were arguments for and against him and victims' representatives' interviews that were summarized for this clemency report. He was offered a chance to be interviewed by the parole board at the Ohio State Penitentiary on May 19, 2009, where the applicant could make a statement for or against his own behalf. Typically, people come in for their own behalf. He declined. He was represented by Rachel Troutman and Kelly Schneider of the Ohio Public Defender's Office, and they went and met with him on June 3rd, 2009. And they were preparing to make arguments in support of clemency, and this is what Marvelous told them. I do not want any evidence on my behalf presented. I do not wish to cause any additional pain to my own family or to the family of my victims. And that was his entire statement. Arguments in opposition of clemency, meaning reasons to put him to death, it was a very narrow statement as well, but here's what it said, and I found that interesting, so I'm going to read it. Arguments in opposition to clemency were presented by Montgomery County Assistant Prosecutor Carly J. Ingram and Assistant Attorney General for the state, Thomas Madden. The state is opposed to the granting of executive clemency in this particular matter. They indicate there is no doubt of his guilt. He confessed, an accomplice testified against him, and physical evidence tied him to the crimes. Furthermore, there's no question as to the gravity of the offenses where he murdered 5 people in a bloody crime spree, along with 3 other co-defendants, 2 of whom were juvenile. It is clear that Keene was the leader of the group and that he himself was the triggerman in 4 of the murders. A detailed and sequenced review of the instant offense was fully presented to the board by the state and is summarized in the details sections above. Additional testimony was provided indicating that Mr. Keene's case has been under judicial review for many years. All courts have affirmed his conviction and that his sentence is warranted. So the governor at the time, Ted Strickland, was given a recommendation by the Ohio Parole Board with 7 members on June 17, 2009, by a vote of 7-0, recommending that executive clemency be denied in the case of Marvelous Keene. And it's got all their signatures. That case, for some reason, sticks in my head. And I cannot explain. It's a Christmas case, so that's why we're bringing it up here. And yes, his last meal was crazy.
And his clemency was denied, and he was put to death on July 21st, 2009, by means of lethal injection.
Yep. We, as the Christmas episodes go along, we've been talking a lot about, I guess we've actually been talking a lot about this the whole time we've been doing True Crime Excess, and that is genetic genealogies and like the ins and outs of all the things related to DNA.
That DNA avalanche.
And one of those places that it comes from, it's like sort of, it's an unexpected place for me. And I wanted to briefly talk with you about the DNA Doe Project because of what they do. Specifically, there's 2 people that are sort of the co-founders over there. And the first one is a lady named Margaret Press. If you like, just go through and pull up her bio, and I don't think a lot of people like read the little bios or about pages on some of these. They're really there to see like the cool news release about whoever's been identified.
Well, sure, yeah.
Her bio, and this is at DNADoeProject.org. This is just Margaret Press for a second, and then I'll talk about the other one. She says, to answer her burning question, how can genetic genealogy help identify John and Jane Does? Margaret Press co-founded the DNA Doe Project in 2017. After months of work hunting down labs, experts, bones, and donations, they tackled their first case in September 2017, and they incorporated as a nonprofit the following month. The subsequent success stories have provided the answer: persistence, patience, and a team of skilled and spirited volunteers, and that's how they use genetic genealogy to help identify John and Jane Does. Now, Margaret grew up in Los Angeles, California. She was 15 years old, and she had inherited a passion for genealogy from her grandmother. And I think everybody has somebody in their family that is you might have to look at cousins and things like that, but I think everybody has someone in their family who's sort of interested in where we all came from.
I think that if you just tell somebody, everybody's interested in it. It's the research that is sort of, somebody's going to do the research, and then other people aren't going to be able to or interested in doing it.
Yeah, and so in my wife's family, her grandmother, who is still alive in her 90s, she is extremely into languages and their origins, which is one of the things that drew me to reading a little bit about Margaret Press. She graduated from UC Berkeley with a degree in linguistics. Then she earned her PhD at UCLA. She specialized in Native American languages and child language development. From her very extensive fieldwork, she published a descriptive grammar of a nearly extinct dialect of the Uto Aztecan family. And I couldn't say the word if I tried, but it's Chemehuevi. It's Chemehuevi. I thought that was very interesting. She ended up spending most of her life working in software development with all that background. And she published 2 novels set in Salem, Massachusetts that were mystery-based. And then she followed that up with essays and short stories. And she wrote a true crime book based on a 1991 murder in her own neighborhood. And that book inspired several documentaries, including an Unsolved Mysteries episode in 1996 and a 1998 episode of the A&E series City Confidential. Currently, she has a lot of experience teaching mystery and crime writing. She joined the idea of DNA testing when it was sort of redefining the genealogy landscape, and became part of a group of citizen scientists who would propel this new field to where it is today. She began with setting up several Y-DNA surname projects. And I'm saying that here because I'm going to say a couple things in a row that I don't totally understand, and I'm hoping you might understand what I'm saying. Once autosomal testing reached critical mass and its potential became apparent for helping in unknown parentage searches, she, like many others, became hooked on the unique challenges of building family trees forward in time rather than backward. And she said the satisfaction that comes from helping an adoptee, basically someone who's been adopted, is profound and addicting. But she extended this methodology to her current mission, and that is returning a name to an unidentified victim, which brings a whole new level of reward. And then she closes out by saying that she's a proud parent and grandparent with descendants of her own to carry her mitochondrial haplogroup C1d and passion for genealogy down her family tree. So I'm just curious, when I say that stuff, that last paragraph or so, do you understand what I just said?
I do.
Okay, so she began with setting up several Y-DNA surname projects. What does that mean?
Well, I don't know. Is it Y as in the letter or Y as in the word?
Y, it says
Okay, so that's an attempt to
DNA.
make it. Oh, it's just the letter Y?
Y-DNA surname projects.
Okay, and so I imagine
it says a surname project studies the different Y chromosome lineages associated with a surname or group of surnames, narrowly, like basically your last name.
It's the male lineage. The Y chromosome is it's passed down from the father. Specifically, what she's doing there is she's following back from participants going along a fatherly route. So it would be her father, and then her father's father, and then her father's father's father, and so forth and so on. It sounds to me like it was interesting the way it was put, because I wouldn't describe it that way. I'm also not any sort of expert, but I don't feel like you're building the family tree forward. But I do understand what she's saying. And
I think that was specifically referencing like adoptions.
Right, but I still don't feel like that's building the family tree forward. I don't think it's building the family tree backwards either. I would say it's because usually, like, let's say with family trees, we all did them in elementary school. We at least, a few limbs of the tree. Do you remember doing that?
Oh, yeah.
You have yourself and your siblings, and then above you and your siblings, you have your parents, and then your parents have, each have a set of parents, and then each one of your grandparents each has a set of parents, and that's how it goes, right? And so basically your heritage is doubled each time you add a limb to the tree, because everybody comes from two people. Right? I mean, that's just how it is. With using it to find using it to find birth parents for children who are adopted, it utilizes the databases where people voluntarily upload their DNA. Now, just sort of, to preface this, the majority of people uploading their DNA for genealogical purposes, they haven't said, like, they've never thought, let me catch a criminal, right? That evolves. And so, like, putting your DNA out there, the benefits of it are, like, you can find your heritage. You can find people who share your heritage. With DNA, I personally have I have my DNA profile, and I was found to be related to I believe it's like 7,000 people in the data bank that I used.
Okay.
And so that would be, I did a DNA test and I got my results back, but then they have a community of people who also use the same, the same avenue to get their DNA. And then you check a box, you say, yes, trace my DNA or whatever. And so from that, was found in this community of people to be related to I don't know, 7,000 people or something like that. It was an enormous amount of people, right? The majority of those people I'm related to, we share very little DNA. And so we would be fifth to sixth cousins was the most common level that I had as far as relations. So, whatever the number you put in front of cousin, that's how many limbs you're going back on your tree.
Got it.
Okay. And so I have to go 5 or 6 generations back. So if we're doubling every single time for each person, you see how it grows really fast.
Oh, yeah.
But so the benefits of that is some people are interested to know who they are blood related to,
right,
even if it is 5 or 6 generations back. The next thing, I believe that she was talking about, the last thing she said about passing on her mitochondrial, I believe she's sort of she may have evidence of this. I don't know, but she's saying that being interested in genealogy is in the genes, and she's passed on that gene to her children and grandchildren. And she's either poking fun at it, serious. I mean, I'm sure she's serious, or she's got some sort of information to indicate that gene is what it takes to be interested in genealogy.
It could even be kind of tongue in cheek both ways.
Well, I will say this: when I did my DNA situation, it's really funny because I had no interest in doing it. I always thought DNA was fake. Anyway,
we've had that talk. I don't know if that made it onto the show, but we talked about it somewhere.
I don't think it has, but so I always thought DNA was made up because it didn't register with me that could really be a thing. And I think sometimes it is used sort of fictionally, and it's just for lack of effort. Like DNA really can be gotten from just about anything nowadays, right?
Right.
But I feel like a lot of times it comes up where it's said that there's DNA. And I'm not opposed to people who have committed crimes sort of being fooled into confessing to them, right? If they say, oh, we've got your DNA, and the person did it, and they're like, well, crap, right? But I don't necessarily think that that's the best way to go. I actually would prefer they actually have the DNA and not just say that they have it. But that's really neither here nor there. I had a good friend who she was adopted, just like we're talking about here. I had known her for so long, and she did a DNA test with her adopted family, and there was a connection made to her biological family. And that's when I realized that DNA was a real thing, because I knew this person well enough to know that they didn't make this up, right? It was a very far connection. It was a very, I would say it was probably 4 or 5 generations back, and they messaged the person, and of course that person said, oh, well, actually I don't know that they ever responded to my friend that was looking, but shortly somebody that was directly related to her responded. So they reached out to their family member and said, hey, this is what is happening here. And so she was able to find her biological family from doing that. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's real. And so that's sort of the experience that I had to do. Now, I was saying that perhaps she was talking about a specific gene. When I did my DNA, I did all the questionnaires, and I gave as much information as I could because I realized what they were doing. they take my DNA profile, which if you look at a DNA profile, it's just a bunch of letters. I mean, really, that's what it ends up being. And it really means nothing if you aren't. I mean, we've got data now that has a good interface that translates it for us, right? But I realized what they were doing was every single attribute I were to say that I have. For example, I have blue eyes and blonde hair, whatever else. They're matching it up to other people who also answer the question the same way and also have the same gene that I do, right?
Basically using it like a mapping scheme.
Well, yeah, they're giving, and I'm sure it's got to go through more than just me answering questions, but it's the beginning of this technology where they're saying, okay, so if somebody has this gene, they most likely have blue eyes, right? And that's how, in turn, we've been able to have like Parabon Labs turn around and take DNA from a perpetrator and define certain aspects of their physical characteristics from the DNA sample that they have, even though they don't know who the person is. They are able to do a rendered drawing of them.
Gotcha.
And it comes from all the people who have voluntarily submitted their DNA and voluntarily given information about themselves. And it's gotten pretty deep at this point. Like, they're asking if you have jittery reactions to caffeine and like things like that, right? And so it's really furthering the understanding of individuals, and I can see where scientists could use it to pinpoint causes and effects and things like that. And there's a lot of people out there who participate willingly, and I participated willingly. I actually did it for my husband because he really wanted to know his heritage, and I was out of Christmas present ideas last year. And I didn't care so much, but I did my DNA, and it started like this whole ruckus because if you'll recall, we were doing the show talking about lots of different DNA things, right?
Right.
And then I got my husband the present, and then it sort of snowballed from there because I will say that my parents, based on my DNA test, my parents submitted their DNA, and I was very close to a 50% match to each of them. And there was no way the place could have known that, right? And, I'm not saying that it was the smartest thing for me to think that DNA didn't exist, but I know that there's naysayers out there.
Yeah,
and
but
I was one of them.
Yeah, when you don't understand a thing, sometimes it's easier to just sort of pretend like it's not a thing.
Right. And I think that was part of it. I didn't believe that a tiny little anything could lead back to a specific person. I just didn't buy it. I felt like prosecutors were using it against people. And there are a lot of situations where, because we've talked about this before, once somebody says like your DNA is there, like what is your response to that if you genuinely didn't do anything, right? I mean, it becomes this like double-edged sword because most people can't explain why their DNA would be there if they haven't done anything. And that's where I feel like you get into these like false confessions and stuff like that. But anyway.
I specifically picked a few cases where if you dig deeper into those cases, we glanced over two of these at Christmas, but and I mentioned it, if you dig into those cases, they had false suspects because they couldn't explain how something had happened with DNA. The mall shooting in California was an example of that, where the dad's DNA was on an apron in the backseat of the car and also ended up on a shell casing that had bounced over the apron.
Right. And I believe that he had like a really good alibi, and
he had a concrete alibi. That's why it confused that case in the beginning.
Right. And so that kind of thing, I always felt like it was blown out of proportion. From my own personal experience, starting with my friend who found her biological family, moving on to getting my DNA checked or tested and getting my DNA profile, to like my parents like being like, that's not a real thing, and doing it, and it reflecting, even though there was no outside connection, that I was in fact 50% my mom and 50% my dad. It made the connection, right? I'm 100% sure that it's a real thing and that it is a valuable tool.
Well, so you're not alone in that, because in addition to Margaret Press, the other person who gets in on this with her is a woman named Colleen Fitzpatrick. Now, she's considered to be an American scientist. She received her BA in physics from Rice University back in the 70s. She got an MA after that in the 80s. And then she ended up getting a PhD in 1983 from Duke University. She worked on a laser radar system at Rockwell International, which is just fascinating to me. She also worked with high resolution optical measurement techniques and photogrammetry at Spectron Development Laboratories. And then she founded Rice Systems, an optics company that did contract research and development in her garage in 1986. Her company grew to employ about 7 scientists. In 2005, it closed its doors because NASA dropped the Spaceship to Jupiter project that Rice Systems had been working on. So basically, they were working on a component that was going to go on a spaceship that was destined to carry humans over to Jupiter. So she had started to write a book in 2002 about forensic genealogy, and no publishers were interested in it. So in 2005, Colleen Fitzpatrick published her book herself, and she started to sell the book at genealogy conferences and set up a corresponding website. She began to write columns on the topic of forensic genealogy in 2006 for different magazines and websites. Hebron Investments asked her to find a missing person because someone wanted to buy some land and the title owner could not be found. So what she started doing was she started locating owners of unclaimed property. In about 75 total cases, she found 73 of them in 30 different countries. So she founded her next venture, which was Identifiers International, with Andy Yeiser, who has now passed away. She uses the techniques of forensic genealogy here to identify victims and perpetrators of violent crimes. And then she starts working on Jane and John Doe cases where the body has been left unidentified for sometimes as long as decades. And in 2007, she helped identify the body of a child who was 2 years old that had died in the 1912 Titanic disaster. That child was identified as Sydney Leslie Goodwin from England. Her family had died in the wreck, and she had relatives in New Zealand. In 2008, she helped identify the remains found in the wreckage of Northwest Flight 4422, which had crashed in Alaska in 1948. That same year, she helped expose Misha Defonska, who wrote Misha, a memoir of the Holocaust years, as a fraud. So Colleen Fitzpatrick and Sharon Sargent also exposed a fraud out of Herman Rosenblatt, who wrote a book called Angel at the Fence. And in 2020, Dr. Fitzpatrick and the Porchlight Project helped Ohio police identify James Zastanowicz as a suspect in the 1987 murder by strangulation of 17-year-old Barbara Blaitnick. There's a couple more things I'm going to click off this list here. In 2014, Fitzpatrick helped police narrow down the list of suspects to 5 men who all had the last name Miller for the murder of Angela Brasso in Phoenix, Arizona in 1992, and the murder of Melanie Burness, 17, in 1993. There was only one possibility, and DNA testing confirmed that Brian Patrick Miller matched the DNA from the killer. In 2015, Miller gets arrested and charged with those 2 murders. He had been a suspect, but he had been released for lack of evidence. He also ends up charged later in the murder of 13-year-old Breonna Taylor. This is what Colleen believes was the first cold case solved by genetic genealogy. This is the Brian Miller case. And this is a 2014, 2014 is when they track him down. In 2015, Colleen Fitzpatrick with Cece Moore, who you've mentioned before, and a team of adoption researchers helped Benjamin Kyle, who had been an amnesiac since 2004, find his identity as William Burgess Powell and to help him find his family members. She also played a role in 2016 in establishing the true identity of Lori Erica Huff, who was a woman who assumed a false identity in 1988 and committed suicide in 2010, after which the husband's family found out that she had stolen the identity of a deceased child. She turned out to be Kimberly McLean, who had severed all ties with her family, and she didn't want to be located by them, so she had adopted a new ID. In 2018 and 2019, she helped Rapid City, South Dakota police with the case of the rape and murder strangulation of 60-year-old Gwen Miller. That's from 1968. And she used Y-DNA to narrow the possible suspects down to 6 or 7 men with the surname Field. They identified a gentleman named Eugene Field as the prime suspect, and he had already died in prison in 2009 from cancer. In 2020, she helped Orange County Police identify the body of a young woman who had been found in 1968, beaten, raped, and had her throat cut near Huntington Beach, California, as 26-year-old Anita Toe. So then in 2017, she had, and I understand some of this is out of order, but in 2017, she co-founded the DNA Doe Project with the aim of identifying dead adults for their families. She did resign from the DNA Doe Project in June of 2020. They've had multiple successes. The list, you can Google the list. It's so many names long. It's probably 20, 25 names at this point. I mention all of this because up next is our last episode of Christmas. This is our next to last episode, and then up next is our last episode of Christmas. And DNA is going to play a big part of our last episode. So we're going to sign off for now, and we hope that you'll join us for our very last episode for Christmas. Do you have anything to add on this so far?
No.
Because I'm going to be asking you to add in on the DNA part next.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Thank you for joining us. We are sponsored by LabRottiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabRottiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.